What's up, guys? Welcome back to the MMA meeting. Let's talk TheWeasle podcast, where we talk all things MMA. Hope you guys are having an amazing one, and that last fight night card was actually exciting. The main event turned out to be arguably the best fight on the whole card, where so many people thought the co-main event was going to be the best fight. Even I thought so. But Holland versus Jack Della Maddalena turned out to be a sparring match. Seemed like both guys were throwing 50% into everything. Was not too fun to watch, but it is understandable why both fighters didn't want to engage with all they can. They both pack a lot of power. They both don't want to make mistakes. It was a much more technical fight than it was a banger, right? So both guys wanted to stay technical, composed, and not risk too much. Jack Della Maddalena's boxing is insanely good, dude. Definitely much better than Kevin Holland's. I didn't like where Holland kept turning his back to Jack. I thought at some point Jack was going to catch him and drop him for that. But Jack let him off the hook one too many times doing that. He did try to cut him off, but didn't really punish him for turning his back like that. Holland was putting up the Philly shell. He was putting his shoulder up, trying to defend himself as much as he can. But when you turn your back to someone like this, like if he fought Wonder Boy or if he fought Shavkat or something like that, Kevin Holland would have gotten punished for sure. But both these two guys didn't want to risk too much in this fight, and that's a bit of a bummer. So that was underwhelming. We thought a lot more of that fight than it turned out to be. But Jack won, against a top 15 fighter. He's going to move up a little bit in the rankings. It was a close fight, but there's no way you give Kevin Holland 2 rounds. Jack, in my opinion, absolutely took 2 rounds. Now, the main event, super close fight. In my opinion, it's one of the closest fights we've seen in recent times. I can see arguments for Shevchenko. I can see arguments for Grasso. I do think Shevchenko ultimately won the fight, but very close. The 5th round for sure, though, was absolutely not a 10-8. It's something I've said for a long time. I think boxing has corrupt judges and MMA has incompetent judges because the boxing judges have been doing it for such a long time. They understand the game very well. In MMA, though, a lot of these judges haven't been doing it for too long, and if they have, they're already old as it is. They're probably not going to bother learning the game. Some of these guys come from boxing too. Like Mike Bell scoring the 5th round a 10-8 for Grasso has to go down as one of the worst scorecards ever, knowing that for like 3 minutes or even 3.5 minutes of that round, Shevchenko was easily winning it. And then made a huge mistake. That is one thing I have to talk about Valentina Shevchenko. So she is a very skilled fighter. She's well-rounded. She could do a lot of great things in the cage. And for a long time, people were saying that she's one of the most skilled fighters we've ever seen, man or woman. I never thought that. I never thought she was like more technical than Volkanovski. I remember getting some debates about this like a year or two ago. I don't think she's as skilled as some of these fighters like Volkanovski, John Jones, Demetrius Johnson, a prime Jose Aldo, Khabib. There's a bunch of these guys that she is absolutely not on the same skill level. But for a female fighter, she is one of the top of the world. The thing we have to talk about Valentina Shevchenko is the amount of times she sabotages her wins, making huge mistakes on losing rounds and even losing fights. She'll be winning fights and then just makes one move and completely loses it because of it. So in that 5th round, for an example, she went in for that head and arm throw. Why would she go for the head and arm throw? Why not go to your double legs that you were shooting before? Why go for the head and arm throw like that in a round that you're winning already? So she misses the head and arm throw, falls to the ground, and that's how Grasso got her back. It's like, wait, it's happening again? And in the first fight, she threw a spinning back kick with no setup and got her back taken because of that too. And she was winning the fight. In the 4th round, she thought she was going to be a downed opponent, putting one hand on the ground and getting kneed, which gave Alexa Grasso her biggest strikes of that round. Another round that Shevchenko was winning. And you look at the Amanda Nunes fight. I believe she went for a head and arm throw at the end of that fight too, and lost the round, ultimately losing the fight, and did something similar to Taila Santos. I've never seen a championship level fighter make that many fight-changing mistakes. It's not once or twice. We're talking about like 4 times. All in championship fights. I don't think it's because she's older now or something like that, because again, she did do it against Amanda Nunes a while ago too. But it is happening a lot more often these days. Now, how much credit do you give the fighters capitalizing on these mistakes, right? Alexa Grasso and Taila Santos are much better than the fighters she was going up against previously. So they're going to capitalize on these mistakes a lot better than the other fighters in the past. Right, the newer fighters are generally better. So you do have to give a lot of credit to fighters like Alexa Grasso and Taila Santos, while also understanding the mistakes that Valentina is making too. This is why grounded knees should be allowed. I can't stand when fighters play the game of trying to be grounded in these kind of positions like that. It also doesn't show good defense. They're trying to just bend the rules enough where, I'm grounded, maybe I'm not grounded. Back in the day, this was horrible. Do you know how many fighters used to scrape their fingers on the ground so nobody can knee them and stuff? It was horrible. They should just take this rule out completely and allow grounded knees. If you miss a takedown, for an example, someone sprawls on top of you and you get into this kind of position, that's on you, man. You messed up on your takedown. That takedown got defended. Now, there's an opportunity for the defender to counter it with knees. A takedown is a big commitment a lot of times. And if you failed on that commitment, there should also be big counters, big consequences to that. And grounded knees should be that. So many rules in scoring need to be changed, man. A lot of people didn't know what impact was defined as. So it's basically just showing reactions to getting hit. It's not what the strike is. It's not how you throw the strike or anything like that. It's just the reaction you see from a fighter taking a blow. It could be a jab, a knee, whatever it is. If you're not showing a reaction to these kind of attacks, they're not going to be scored heavy, right? They're not going to be scored big. And I think that just goes against certain fighters. I don't agree with this rule. For an example, when you see these knees from Alexa Grasso, in my world, if I were to make my own scoring system, firstly, I will allow the grounded knees regardless. Keep her there, keep kneeing. But in terms of scoring, I think a lot of these knees she landed should be a lot more meaningful to the scoring. But the way that it's written right now, it benefits certain fighters naturally, like Max Holloway, for an example. He rarely ever shows reaction to punches. Same with Francis Ngannou and other fighters with granite chins and good composure to taking hits. Then again, we did see Max give reactions to big punches from Poirier in the first round, and when he took shots from Volkanovski in the third fight. Yair drew some reactions from his strikes too, and a reaction we saw from Ngannou would be the right hands that he connected on him in the first fight against Stipe, and that one right hand showed a decent reaction in the second fight with Stipe before Stipe got knocked out. Now, I'm pretty sure I know the reason why they changed the rules to this. They're solely focused on damage, not clean strikes landing as if it's point fighting, right? Point fighting would be like, if I land a clean strike on you, it scores pretty big. They're not looking at it like that. They're looking at pure damage. If a fighter shows that they are damaged, that's what's going to count. So guys with power and good chins are going to be in an advantage. And when we're talking about reactions, we're not talking about facial expressions. Expressions could be a thing, but it's more talking about how the body responds to taking a big hit. So like if you get hit to the head, obviously you're creating damage to the brain. And from the damage to the brain, it's going to cause the body to react in an unbalanced, strange way. We all know what those look like, right? We all know when a fighter is hurt. Or if you're taking a big shot to the body, do they curl over? How does the body respond from the organs getting hit? Or a bone breaking or something like that. This is the kind of stuff that the scoring system is looking for. Not did a clean strike land. And after doing a couple Who Really Won videos and looking at the comments and stuff, it does seem like this is the biggest confusion right now for the fans when it comes to scoring fights. As it does seem like a lot of people just believed if you landed a clean strike, it scores big, when that's actually not the case because the scoring system is kind of busted. That's why they even put lacerations and swelling, which I think is ridiculous. In some instances, swelling and lacerations do mean that they got hit pretty good, but in some other moments, it doesn't mean that. For an example, when Alexander Gustafsson threw that right hand at John Jones, and Jones went to slip it, but it caught his eyebrow at the very edge of the punch, that caused a big cut on John Jones that you still see a scar from today. But the punch wasn't because the knuckles landed, it's because the glove skid right past it on the edge and cut him open. There's instances like that, and then there's fighters who open up even if a gust of wind blew into the cage, right? You got the Diaz brothers. I mean, these guys are cut open every single fight. A jab cuts them open. So when you look at cuts and stuff to dictate who did more damage, it goes against certain fighters that already have scar tissue. So what do they have to do? They have to go to the doctor and get surgery just so they can win decisions? I've talked about this so many times. The scoring criteria is so broken and dumb. When I make breakdowns about who won fights, I don't want people to get the notion that I agree with the rules, that I agree with the scoring system and I co-sign it. No, you're probably not going to find someone who's more of a critic on the scoring system than I am. And it's ironic that I do make the scoring videos while also being so against how they score fights. And I think a big reason as to why I'm so against how the scoring is because I understand it, right? I've read the rules so many times. I know how to implement them on fights and I see what's landing and what's not. And it really makes sense to me as to why the scoring system is so bad. So we talk about the cuts and stuff. We talk about damage and how that's scored. What about grappling? When is grappling compared to striking effectiveness? The only thing that's stated to compare them to is if they both potentially could finish the fight. But a lot of times, grappling is not getting to that point. Like if they secure a takedown, or they transition, or they reverse a position on the ground, how much does this actually get scored for? The only grappling technique that they get more into detail about are takedowns. Takedowns by themselves really mean nothing. That's pretty much what's written out. They don't mean much. Back in the day, they used to mean a lot more. These days, it's what you do with the takedown that matters now. It's not just taking them to the ground, and the rules state that a takedown is only warranted if you're able to establish an attack after the takedown. So just taking a fighter to the ground does not mean you took him down. That's how busted the scoring system is. I do like some of the damaging aspect because that's what ultimately does matter in fights, but it's so boldly defined. I wish they gave examples or pinpointed it more precisely so it wasn't so subjective. And that's the thing about the scoring system. It is written in a way where it's completely subjective. Even among the judges, one judge is going to see something different from the others because of how the rules are written. This is why point fighting scoring works so well. It is so much more objective. If you land clean, you get points. If you don't land clean, then you get less points or no points. It's very straightforward. Judging off damage entirely makes it subjective because you don't know a lot of times if the fighter is actually getting hurt, right? Some guys have a very good poker face, like Floyd Mayweather, for an example. In his entire career, you go me point maybe 2 handfuls of times he's gotten hurt in 50 professional fights. Maybe even that. Some people should just say on one hand you can count it, but I'm pretty sure he got hurt way more times than that, but he just never showed it. Boxers who have fought Floyd Mayweather have even said that the guy is the most composed they've ever seen. They would hit this guy big sometimes, and he would never show like it affected him. There's some guys in MMA who do a similar kind of thing, like Max Holloway, right? Max Holloway has a good poker face. He gets cracked by some big shots, and this guy rarely ever shows that he's hurt. Unless on rare occasions, like, with Dustin and Volk in the third fight, and some moments against Yair. A couple shots from Conor McGregor back in the day, too. Now, what do you do with them two? Do you do the rematch? I would say you do the rematch for 2 reasons. Number 1, Grasso and Shevchenko was very close. It ended in a draw. The reason why it's a robbery is not because it was a close fight. Close fights are not robberies. But it's because the 5th round was scored at 10-8. And if it was scored fairly, a 10-9, Shevchenko would have won the fight. So that's one reason. The second reason is we have 2 top contenders that deserve a title shot. Erin Blanchfield and Menon Fiorot both deserve the title shot. If it was just like Menon Fiorot that deserve a title shot or something, then you just give it to her. I think you have Shevchenko fight Erin Blanchfield. But the fact that both those 2 fighters are doing so well right now, they defeated top contenders, they're both at the top of the rankings, I think you have them fight each other and finish this rivalry between Shevchenko and Grasso. I know I'm just like a lot of you guys, man. I want to see Erin Blanchfield fight for the belt too. I want to see Menon Fiorot fight for the belt. Both these 2 fighters will make it very interesting. I think Blanchfield now has a much better chance to become a champion than we originally thought. And I do see a lot of Blanchfield fans wanting her to fight for the belt right now. I do understand that. I would love to see it. If they make Blanchfield fight for the belt, I am not complaining at all, right? I just think it's more logical at this point to have Blanchfield fight Fiorot to establish who is the rightful number 1 contender and finish this rivalry between Grasso and Shevchenko. What about Raul Rosas Jr. getting the knockout before a minute into the fight? I did not expect this guy to bang it out with Terrence Mitchell like that because Terrence Mitchell hits hard. This guy has some power in his strikes and he caught Raul good with the right straight. But then Raul hit that back step left overhand counter, dropping Terrence Mitchell. It almost looked like he KO'd him the way Josh Emmett KO'd Michael Johnson. It looked like Mitchell came back too and Raul finished him with ground and pound. That's a kind of performance we want to see. That's actually something I expected to see from like Kevin Holland and Jack Della. More from Kevin Holland. Jack Della is usually very composed, but Kevin Holland usually tries to find that right hand on you, but Raul delivered big time. Daniel Zellhuber getting the Darce choke on Christos Giagos. This guy is a special talent, man. He heard him first, displayed some clean striking. The guy is massive for lightweight. He's 6'1". You don't see a lot of 6'1" guys in the lightweight division, so put his name in the hat of lightweight prospects. Lupita Godinez putting it on Elise Reed, dropping her, getting the rear naked choke. Elise Reed is super tough because there was that armbar. I have no idea how she survived that. I don't know how her arm did not snap there, but she got dominated, man. Roman Kopylov is the guy. Roman Kopylov is someone to really keep your eyes on because when he came into the UFC, I did not think too much of him because Carl Robertson, a guy I believe who has a kickboxing background, submitted Roman Kopylov who has a combat sambo background, 5-time world champion. And then after that, he lost to Albert Duraev, who's a pretty good fighter. Nobody really thought much of Roman Kopylov. Everybody thought, okay, he's just going to be another guy who's roaming around. He's not going to do anything too special. Then goes on a 4 knockout win streak, KOing Alessio Di Chirico, Punahele Soriano, Claudio Ribeiro, and now Josh Fremd. That body shot he hit Josh Fremd with was one of the cleanest body shot knockouts I've ever seen. This was pretty much a walk-off body shot knockout. When do you see that? Clean striking from Roman Kopylov. And then we go to Edgar Chairez getting his fight overturned to a draw against Daniel Da Silva. Man, a lot of people betting on that fight must have been mad because Edgar Chairez is on his way to win. This is a guy I thought that was going to win this fight too. He has him in a guillotine. Daniel Da Silva is not escaping this guillotine, man. It is deep in the 3rd round too. Even if he survived, I don't see how Edgar Chairez loses that round. And I believe it was 1-1 going into the 3rd. He was most likely going to win that fight by submission or even decision. And then the ref grabs Daniel Da Silva's arm, which does look like it goes limp, but I think it was too quick on calling it off. This is not to say, oh, just let the guy sit in the guillotine and get choked unconscious for an hour, but you have to look at what other refs do. They usually wait, they pull the arm like once, 2, 3 times, and if there's no response, then they call it. It's possible, though, that Daniel Da Silva was unconscious. He did go unconscious for a second, and as soon as the ref called the fight off, Edgar Chairez releases his guillotine, then Da Silva woke up. That is possible, too, because it was a really quick separation, right? So maybe Da Silva was only unconscious for like half a second, but as a result, it got overturned to a draw. So crazy, man. Cortez vs. Jasmine was a good fight. Back and forth, both fighters showing their heart. Charlie Campbell destroying Alex Reyes. Alex Reyes was coming off a, 5-year layoff, was it? He was definitely not ready to come back in there, man. So this was a really good card. For a fight night, I would score it like a maybe 7 or 8 out of 10. But it is pretty rare to see a title fight headline a fight night card. Remember when TJ Dillashaw fought Henry Cejudo? That was on a fight night. People forgot about that. Where TJ made a huge weight cut to come down to 125 and got starched in the first round. 32 seconds into it, TJ also fought Dominic Cruz in a fight night, I believe. That fight was super, super close. Still to this day, a lot of people think that TJ should have won that. He was having a hard time with Cruz's movement in the first 3 rounds or so, but then started to find leg kicks against Cruz, and he was using leg kicks better than most guys Cruz has fought before. And you saw what Henry Cejudo was able to do with leg kicks against Cruz. I mean, when you see a guy moving that way, he's constantly moving laterally, taking on these sharp angles and stuff like that, but generally he likes to stick on the outside before he darts in with that straight or a takedown. He's going to be open to leg kicks. But back in those days where Uriah Faber was fighting Dominic Cruz and Demetrius Johnson and Joseph Benavidez, these guys were headhunting him for the most part, which is something you don't want to do against Cruz. You want to take out his legs first, maybe go up to the body, and then finally come up to the head with some good conditioning. You saw Marlon Vera do that very well against Cruz, but it's kind of crazy when you think about Dominic Cruz's footwork for such a long time was an issue for some of the highest level fighters in the game. And then eventually it got figured out. Every long-time champion eventually gets figured out. The only guy that did not get figured out at all was Khabib. Even guys like GSP and John Jones, they had fights where most people believe that they lost. You had Dominic Reyes figure out a lot of what John Jones does in that fight between them two, and Alexander Gustafsson in the first fight with John Jones. That was very close. Both those two fighters are doing a lot of good things against Jones, figuring him out a bit. On the scorecards, most people believe that Jones should have lost those. It seems like these days, a lot more people are retracting the Gustafsson controversy, but everybody still believes that Dominic Reyes, right? Everybody still believes Dominic Reyes beat John Jones. And then when you look at GSP, it's the Johnny Hendricks fight. You could even say the first BJ Penn fight, but GSP was not in his prime when he fought BJ Penn the first time. And also, GSP does have losses, right? He lost to Matt Hughes, he lost to Matt Serra, arguably lost to Johnny Hendricks. The only champion in the UFC that had multiple title defenses and never got figured out to that level was Khabib. People still like to bring up the Gleison Tebow fight because Gleison Tebow made it competitive. He only made it competitive because he defended the takedowns. He actually didn't do barely anything offensive in that fight. If he put on some offense, now we're talking about a whole different story, but he was on the back foot and not really throwing much for the majority of that fight. Khabib won every single round because he was more offensive, even though he got every single one of his takedowns stuffed. That's only one thing you could point out in that Khabib's wrestling in that fight, which was way before his prime, by the way. He was extremely young when he fought Gleison Tebow. So it wouldn't be too fair to connect that to his skills and his prime. But his wrestling did get figured out. Maybe the lack of USADA has something to do with that because, Gleason was a pretty beefed up guy back then. Some stuff changed after USADA came along. He did get older too, so there is that. But as Vitor and when Mirko Cro Cop left the UFC, how much age mattered without USADA around. But do you guys remember when Cain Velasquez fought JDS on a fight night card? I think it was the first Fox card back in the day, man, where JDS knocked Cain Velasquez out cold, dropped him with the overhand, and finished him with ground and pound. I believe still to this day, it's the largest viewed fight night card in history. I think it was like over 5 million people watched that fight because Cain was a big deal and JDS was storming through the contenders. That guy was obliterating everybody he was fighting. A lot of the newer fans do not appreciate JDS for the monster that he was on his come up. I mean, he was finishing fighters with different kind of punches. His UFC debut, his 8th professional fight, was against Fabricio Verdum. Fabricio Verdum back then was a contender, and he's also known as one of the greatest heavyweights of all time. The guy who submitted Fedor Emelianenko, later he submitted Cain Velasquez, he beat Alistair Overeem at this point. He's beaten so many top tier, all-time great heavyweights, and that's the first guy JDS fights. What does JDS do? Knocks him out for his UFC debut 1 minute and 20 seconds into the first round. He hits him with an uppercut. Fabricio Verdum made a big mistake on moving backwards to throw an overhand to counter. JDS caught him clean, finished him with ground and pound, that was it. So he finished Verdum with an uppercut. In his second fight, he puts down Stefan Struve, who was making his UFC debut, with a right hook off a flurry. Then he fights Mirko Cro Cop in his 3rd UFC fight, and he submitted him with punches. He hit him with an uppercut in the clinch, and Mirko pretty much tapped out, right? He told the ref he's done. I think he broke his nose at that point. Then he puts down Gilbert Yvel and Gabriel Gonzaga, both in the first round with a left hook. Then fights Roy Nelson, beats him by decision, beats Shane Carwin by decision, knocks out Cain Velasquez in the first round, claiming the UFC heavyweight title, then puts Frank Mir down with a straight before he got destroyed by Cain Velasquez. Look at that run he had from his UFC debut all the way to his first title defense. Fabricio Verdum, Stefan Struve, Mirko Cro Cop, Gabriel Gonzaga, Roy Nelson, Shane Carwin, Cain Velasquez, Frank Mir. He has some of the most terrifying offensive boxing skills with good takedown defense too, ever in the heavyweight division. It's just, Cain found the biggest weakness of his that doomed him for the rest of his career. He was a completely different fighter on the back foot. If you pressure this guy, he is not nearly as scary. And oftentimes, like when he fought Cain the second and third times, when he lost to Stipe Miocic, when he fought Cyril Gane, he just could not fight backwards whatsoever. The only kind of guys he was able to perform backwards pretty well was against Derek Lewis, Tai Tuivasa, guys like that. But against more technical strikers, it was hard for him. It was really, really hard. But that was a long time ago, man. I could talk about a whole bunch of fighters back in the day that I used to watch and what the narratives were around those fighters, how special they were at the time. By the time we hit 40 years old, all of us that watched those older fighters, we're going to be talking about it then too, man. We're going to be like, yo, back in the day, you guys don't remember how much of a monster Thiago Silva was at one point. Or what about when Keith Jardine upsetted Chuck Liddell, who is known to be one of the best fighters in the world pound for pound at the time. There's so many special things that happened back in the day, man. But today, the fighter that it seems like everybody appreciates is Sean Strickland. Bro, I watched Sean Strickland in the beginning, dude. I remember when he had the High School Musical hairstyle. He was liberal Sean Strickland. I remember this guy, when he started as a middleweight, went down to the welterweight division, and then more recently moved up again. He never really surprised a whole lot of people. I think the only fight that got people's attention was his win over Alex Garcia. Because back in that day, it was like around 2015, 2016, I believe. Alex Garcia has some special skills, and people believed that he would be able to go somewhere if he just realized his potential. That loss he had against Neil Magny wasn't good, but then getting knocked out by Sean Strickland was eye-opening. And not too far after that, he fought Kamaru Usman and got destroyed. This is back when no one wanted to fight Usman. No one dared even say his name. But Strickland didn't care. Strickland fought the guy and had the same attitude as always. He got dropped and all that stuff. And there's something to say about a fighter who just cuts way too much weight. They're completely deteriorating themselves. Sean Strickland is a middleweight that was cutting too much. He didn't look good on the skills back then. He even said, I don't even know why I fought welterweight, man. He's obviously a much better fighter in the middleweight division. There's a lot of other fighters like that too, where they were just cutting too much. Like Gilbert Burns in the lightweight division, he was cutting too much. He's a real welterweight, smaller on the welterweight size, but he's definitely not a lightweight. You look at Rumble Johnson back in the day. Rumble was never a welterweight. He was never even a middleweight. The guy was killing himself to go down to those weight classes. He was naturally a light heavyweight. So there are weight bullies for sure. There are guys who are able to cut the weight and not hurt themselves enough to where they can overpower their smaller opponents, acting as a weight bully. But then there's times where fighters, they cut too much, hoping they could use their size in those smaller divisions, but they hurt themselves so much in the weight cut, it doesn't allow them to do so. They're way too weak going into the fight. They can't take a punch the same way. Their cardio took a hit. It just makes more sense for guys like Sean Strickland or Robert Whittaker, for an example, to move up to their natural weight class. Robert Whittaker, I believe, walks around like 215 pounds. Even Tyson Pedro said that Whittaker weighs more than he does, and Pedro's a light heavyweight. It's crazy, man, but these days, fighters appreciate Sean Strickland, and I'm so happy to see a guy who I've been watching for a while now actually make the strides to become so beloved by so many fans. But the thing that everybody does appreciate from Sean Strickland is how real he is. Strickland is out of pocket a lot of times, but people seem to love his honesty, and at moments relate to his upbringing, the way he dresses, and even his patriotism for his own country. Strickland to a lot of people is like a breath of fresh air of all the fakeness that you see these days. Finally a guy who's just gonna say it to your face, right? Finally a guy who's gonna be straightforward, honest, to the point with everything he says. Whether you agree with it or you don't agree with it, at least you can appreciate somebody who's gonna give you honesty. And in today's climate, it seems like there's a bit of starvation of just realness, like honest, whatever take it is. Whether it's controversial, whether it's praising, whether it's a good thing to say, if it's a bad thing to say, whatever it is, people these days seem to really appreciate honesty at this point. Because whatever you're tuning in, it does seem like it's fake so often that people are kind of sick of it at this point. And Strickland will tell you, man, whether you like him or not, he'll tell you straight to your face the honesty of what he believes. And with his honesty, you see him appreciate the fans. I mean, he made that video, yesterday, 2 days ago, where he was giving respect to the fans. He was appreciating their support, appreciating what they do for the sport. And it seemed genuine. Right? Sometimes you hear fighters say stuff like that, like, yeah, I appreciate the fans, without you guys, this is not possible. But a lot of the times, it does seem kind of fake, like they're just saying it to get on the fans' good side. With Strickland's a different feeling. He seems honest and genuine when he actually appreciates the fans. I mean, him bringing up the fan to spar with him for the open workouts, putting the mic in fans' faces, for them to say something, and have a laugh with people, and not with only connecting with the fans, but where he comes from. He represents the average citizen. Besides some of the more unhinged stuff he said in the past, which some of it's pretty funny, but the guy came from nothing, actually came from nothing, and made it all the way to the top while giving credit to all the fans. And Strickland coming from nothing especially resonates with the people right now. Well, you see someone like Sean Strickland make it somewhere. It gives a lot of people hope, right? It gives a lot of people a path, like some kind of confidence, motivation to move forward. And I think with his platform, he does actually talk about this too. He talks about, you got to keep pushing forward. You got to keep doing it. If a guy like me can make it somewhere, I'm just like everybody else. I just worked hard. He's using his platform to motivate some people. And I think a lot of people also like Sean Strickland for the stuff he said about Adesanya. I think most fans still like Adesanya probably more than they like Sean Strickland because Adesanya is more popular. That's what I'm thinking. It's hard to say because Adesanya was the biggest star actively in the sport besides Conor McGregor and John Jones. So I would think that a lot of those fans are still on his side. And Sean Strickland really wasn't a known name going into that fight. So I think a lot of people still like Adesanya, but there seem to be a lot of big reasons as to why a lot of fans started to turn their back on Adesanya, especially in lead up of their fight. So when Strickland was talking about the whole dog thing, we already been through that. We know all about it. It's weird. It's strange. It's disgusting. There's that whole thing, and a lot of fans were not on board with it. But not only that, then Izzy, like a couple days, I think even a day before the fight, he was on social media telling fans to get lost, leave, don't support him. And this is leading up to his fight. Now, firstly, no one is entitled to anyone's time besides your children and your parents. But when you acknowledge the fans who are responsible for even making fighting a career choice, it will be admirable and paint you in good light. Look at the difference of the way Izzy reacted to the fans compared to Strickland. I think it's another reason why so many fans just chose Strickland's side because he was engaging with them a lot more. He was playing it out for them. He was making it entertaining for the fans, not for himself, but for the fans. He was doing it all for the people. He carried the whole fight week. He was sparring with fans on stage. Who does that? I mean, he can hurt himself out there, but he's doing it for the audience. He puts out a video appreciating the fans and stuff like that. When do champions do that, right? There's a couple that have done it, but I've never seen a champion do it to the level that Sean Strickland does, right? I would never think Strickland would ever say for fans to not support him, you can leave, I don't care about you, and all this kind of stuff. And not only that, there seems to be a resurgence of American champions. If you're an American fan, you're probably really happy right now, especially if Colby could beat Leon, because if Colby beats Leon, there are 5 American champions in the UFC then. John Jones, Jamal Hill is technically still a champion, Sean Strickland, and Sean O'Malley. If Colby can get the welterweight belt, then you have 5 champions. Almost the entire male divisions have an American champion at the top. Right now, there's only half. So you have Leon Edwards, who is the welterweight champion, Islam Makhachev, who is the lightweight champion, Alexander Volkanovski, and Alexander Pantoja. So you have 4 champions who are American and 4 champions who are not American. I don't know the last time we had 5 American champions in the sport. It's been a while. Maybe when Kane, John Jones, Frankie, Dominic Cruz were no, that's 4. So there was a time recently where there was a lot of Mexican champions. There were 3 in total, which is more than ever in history. One of them was an interim champion. There were times where we had a bunch of Brazilian champions. Most of UFC history were American champions, of course, but there is an American fighter who got released. That is Derek Brunson. Derek Brunson got released by the UFC, the longtime gatekeeper who nearly got a title shot a couple times throughout his career. One time got blockaded by Israel Adesanya, then Jared Cannonier. I still don't know exactly why he got released. I don't think it's like, oh, he's just doing bad, because he had a fight lined up against Roman Dolidze. He was booked to fight Dolidze, so he gets released. Maybe he wanted it, I don't know exactly what happened. And then strange enough, the first thing that he does is calling out Jake Paul. I don't think Jake Paul would ever fight Brunson. Not because Brunson is just so powerful and such a good boxer, right? Jake would destroy Brunson in a boxing match, I believe, but he's not a big name. Why would Jake fight Brunson? Like, it was actually the last person I thought would call out Jake Paul. Derek Brunson calling out Jake Paul. I never would have thought he would do that. It's just so random. And now we got word that the UFC is going to China again. UFC China is happening for December 9th. And there's only one fight that's rumored so far to be on it. That's Zhang Yang versus Benson Ribeiro. And if you're wondering what the last UFC China card was, it was when Zhang Weili fought Jessica Andrade and won the belt. That was the last time they went to China, back in August 31st of 2019. You had Li Jingliang on the card versus Leslie dos Santos. You had Kai Kara France versus Mark De La Rosa. You had Song Qinan on the card. Anthony Hernandez, Da Un Jung. Damir Ismagulov versus Thiago Moises. It was a pretty good fight night card, man, and I'm pretty sure they're gonna stack this one too. They have to put Zhang Weili again, right? Back then when she fought Jessica Andrade, she wasn't that much of a name, right? Not too many people knew about her. Just the hardcore fans knew about her. Now, it's a whole different thing. She is massive. Even some of the casual fans know who she is in America, let alone China and some of the other Asian countries around that region. Do y'all electrifying that place will be if Zhang Weili fights there again? But who do you put her up against? Do you put her up against Yang Jianan? That's 2 Chinese fighters going up against each other. I don't know how much the audience is going to like that. I think it would be better for her to fight Tatiana Suarez there. But I guess Yang Jianan would be interesting. It would be kind of historic, 2 Chinese fighters headlining a China card for the UFC. But one thing I do know is that most countries do not like seeing 2 of their own fighting each other. Li Jingliang has to be on it. That's a given. Bring out the suit, bring out the swagger. This guy is an exciting fighter to watch. He has to be on it. I can already see in the comments people are going to bring up Adesanya. Yeah, Adesanya, fight at home. It's been a long time. No, I'm just kidding. But another fighter that has to be on there is Song Yadong, so they can witness in person one of the best young talent in the sport right now perform. And I do hear rumors, there's no source to it, so take it with a grain of salt. People are trying to say that he's fighting Petr Yan. If they have Petr Yan versus Song Yadong on that card, Zhang Weili versus Tatiana Suarez, Li Jingliang versus, let's do Daniel Rodriguez again. I mean, that's looking like almost a pay-per-view card. It would have to go down as one of the most stacked fight night cards of all time. In other news, we have Sean O'Malley chasing the money with boxer callouts. Do you guys see this? He's calling out Gervonta Davis. Now he's saying he's going to beat up Devin Haney. It's all on social media, so it doesn't really mean too much. And of course, MMA fighters are going to want to fight boxers. As sad as that is, because big MMA stars can make a lot of money in boxing. But we should have known that he would do stuff like this, because this is what he wants. It's what he's always wanted since he said that he wouldn't fight contenders without getting paid. He's a smart businessman. If he wasn't going to fight contenders without getting paid a certain amount, he's chasing the money, of course. He wants to be the best fighter he can be. He wants to be champion. He wants to break records, all this sort of stuff for sure. But it seems like for Sean O'Malley, making money is the bottom line. If he's not making money, he doesn't care about these titles and records and any of this kind of stuff. That's just an aftermath. That's just secondary. That's a side effect, for the money that he wants to make. I don't see a world where he fights these boxers anytime soon. He just became UFC champion. There's no way they would have him fight Gervonta Davis or Devin Haney. Do you know how badly he would get beat up? Imagine fighting Tank Davis. Even though Tank is very, very small, Sean O'Malley would get decimated out there. It wouldn't even be close. He would body shot knock him out or something like that. Devin Haney would probably ride him out to a decision, beating him up and peppering him in the face the whole time. I don't think he's really putting too much attention to these boxers. I think he's just playing with them a little bit right now. Sean's a smart guy. He's not expecting to fight one of these boxers right now. His next opponent is going to be a contender in the UFC. So it's either going to be Merab, it's either going to be Aljamain Sterling again, it's going to be Cheeto that he wants. What if Song Yadong fights Petr Yan and beats him? There's a lot of stuff that could go down here. Corey Sandhagen, there's so many contenders for Sean O'Malley right now. And then we go to the questions. So we're going to start with John Jordan, the OG. At this point in their respective careers, who would you favor in an Usman Strickland rematch? Say it's at 185. Do you think Sean would have success, or is that just a stylistic nightmare for the champion? Right now, as they are, I'm going with Strickland. Usman's knees are shot. The takedowns are not going to be nearly as threatening as they were the first time. Strickland is much bigger now. He's not cutting all that weight. If they were to fight each other at 185, Usman would probably be outsized. So not only is Usman a lot more limited with his takedowns because of all the wear and tear on his body, but he also will not have the same kind of strength to wrestle with Strickland as before. And we know in the boxing, Usman's going to get dealt with this time. Strickland might not knock him out. He may not finish him, but I think he wins a decision. If Usman had very good takedowns, if he was able to drive, if he was able to have a good shot, Strickland could be in some trouble. But knowing that he's older these days with the wear and tear on his body, obviously with evidence, he can't shoot the same kind of takedowns he used to. He just kind of bends down and reaches for your legs. That will not work against Strickland. Then we go to Mike Griffith. 2 questions. The Ultimate Fighter ended in August, and we still have no dates for Conor and Chandler. Then Conor comes out saying that he wants it at 185. Then Dana says there is no update on it. What's the deal with this dude? Is Conor fighting Chandler or not? Man, I have no idea. There is that leak that they're fighting in December, but I don't know if that's true. I don't know if they're still going to go with it or that was just the plan and they forgot to delete it. I've heard Conor's not in the USADA pool right now or something like that too. There's a whole lot of stuff going on with Conor, and what I would say is if he was actually motivated like he used to be, these would not be as much of an issue as they were, because I think he would be motivated enough to get back in there and not have these kind of distractions and all these speed bumps in the way. So I do think they will fight. I think Conor and Chandler will probably fight. I'm starting to think it's going to be next year though. And I don't think it'll be a 185. I think at most it'll be 170. Then your second question, if Adesanya loses to Strickland again, don't you think this is a good idea to call it a day and retire? I mean, he's already beat everybody at 185, and if he's getting beat that badly by Strickland, I can't imagine what Yuri Prohaska, Jamal Hill, or even Anthony Smith would do to him at 205. Don't you think it's a good idea to start thinking about a different path and letting go of MMA? I wouldn't go that far. I mean, Adesanya is still one of the best in the world. Losing to Strickland is not entirely a bad thing. It just happens sometimes. Some guys have good styles against you, and it's a difficult matchup. For him to retire, losing to Strickland again, I don't think so, because he still could fight in middleweight, go up against other guys there. Maybe a Hamza fight, maybe 205, maybe too much, because those guys are bigger than him. I think the only thing that could point to retirement is the fact that Adesanya has said before that he does get bored a bit, being so dominant and fighting the same guys, and maybe he goes up to 205 and tests himself. I don't think he should retire. They went to Mike Griffith again. Best MMA podcast on the planet. You're the boss, man. I pay no attention to anything Jake Paul and his brother do because I'm not a fan of fake fighters, but I saw you talk about Jake Paul's press conference on your last podcast, so I had to check it out. Super entertaining press conference. Let me ask you this. How crazy would it be to have another crossover with Conor McGregor versus Tate? Can you imagine the buildup on that if Conor was able to pull over 2 million buys with a guy as boring as Khabib on the microphone? Can you imagine how much Conor and Tate would make if they make that fight in the UFC? It makes 5 million buys, maybe even more. What do you think? Were you drunk when you asked this question? Yeah, Tate and Conor would draw a lot. Probably break the record, for sure. Tate at one point was like the most known man alive, and Conor's the biggest star in MMA. Yeah, they break that 2.4 million buys. For sure. I don't think Khabib's boring on the mic, though. I think Khabib's pretty funny. Then we go to the public questions, and we're going to start with Froggy. Hey Weasel, since Deshaun Strickland just shocked the world, how do you rate his chances against the top 15 of the division? Also, how different do you see the rematch being with Izzy if it happens? Good question. So Strickland versus the top 15. He beats Andre Muniz. He would beat Chris Curtis, but they'll never fight each other. He beats Paul Craig, stops the takedowns and outstrikes him. He beats Imavov. Imavov is very, very talented, but he doesn't have the best fight IQ. He beats Kelvin, and apparently, according to Strickland, he does a number on Kelvin in sparring. But we know that sparring Sean Strickland is a mythical fighter, so we probably don't see that version of Sean Strickland in the octagon. Strickland beats Brendan Allen, beats Jack Hermanson, beats Derek Brunson. I think he beats Roman Dolidze. Dolidze doesn't have the best striking defense. I think he will get hit a lot. And I do believe he also defends the takedowns. He's too slow to catch Strickland unexpected. If Adesanya cannot catch Strickland, there's no way Dolidze does. He beats Paulo Costa. Paulo Costa can be whiffing at air the whole time, gas himself out. Strickland drags him into deep waters, and I think finishes him late in the fight, where he's just barraging on him. Kind of similar to what he did against Abus Magomedov, but in like the 4th or 5th round. I think he beats Marvin Vettori, but that's a tough fight. Marvin Vettori is pretty well-rounded. He's not excellent at anything, but I think he's good enough at everything to make it competitive with Strickland. But I think Strickland at the end of the day wins, and I'm just curious to see how Vettori performs after all that damage he took from Cannonier, because that's some different kind of head trauma that he took. Jared Cannonier, if they were to rematch, I think it's a close fight, man. Both guys look so much better after fighting each other. That is something we haven't talked about too much. I think that fight between them two really upped their games, because it was a close fight. Both guys believe they won. Cannonier came out with the victory, and they just look so much better after that fight. Both guys. Cannonier's performance against Vettori, now Strickland's performance against Adesanya and Magomedov. Cannonier will land some really good leg kicks. I think his power is always going to be a threat, and honestly, the scoring system favors Cannonier's style. That's the biggest thing. Strickland's probably not going to hurt Cannonier, and because of damage being so heavy in scoring right now, it's naturally just going to be hard for Strickland to beat Cannonier. I don't think Strickland gets hurt in the fight. I think he takes some leg kicks. I think he takes some big punches a few times throughout the fight, not too much. But I don't think he's going to be able to deliver with the same kind of damage that Cannonier can deliver on him. So I think Cannonier wins a rematch just because the scoring is so catered to his style and not as much for Strickland. Robert Whittaker. I'm going to go with Robert Whittaker in this one. I think he can mix up the wrestling fairly well, enough to win some rounds here. I think he'll land the most damaging shots, but I see him missing a whole lot too. His jabs are going to be very interesting to see how that works against Strickland, because Strickland's so good at parrying those. And if he gets his jab parried, Whittaker's going to have a difficult time with Strickland, because I can see the right hand missing after that. The head kick could potentially land. It's a very sneaky way he throws it, and I think Strickland may be able to fall for it. But I think wrestling from Whittaker is ultimately going to win on this fight. Very, very close though. I think Dreykus beats Strickland, but another competitive fight. I think, again, the wrestling and the grappling is going to make the difference here, where I think Strickland is going to outstrike Dreykus overall, but it can go either way. This fight is nearly 50-50 for me. And then Adesanya, I think Strickland beats Adesanya in a rematch. Pretty much for the stuff that we know about already, and Strickland never even attempted a takedown, which would change the game completely for Adesanya. So even if Adesanya addresses some of the stuff he made mistakes on the first time, he didn't feel Strickland's wrestling. So there's a whole different side of Strickland's game that Adesanya has no idea about. Then we get to Reaper Omega. With a recent completion of Sean's prophecy due to both O'Malley and Strickland winning titles in their respective divisions, we have to start being more open to the possibilities of each champion losing to a contender who may have been overlooked during their rise. After all, the unpredictability of MMA is what makes it such a spectacle. With this in mind, who would you say is the dark horse of each UFC weight class based on their current top 10s? Keep up the good work, bro. Always find your breakdowns to be educational and enjoyable. Thank you so much, man. And really good question. It's a hard one to answer, because when you got guys like these two Seans being very much overlooked, most people, even the champions, believing that these are their easiest fights. Aljo thought O'Malley was going to be easy, as did all the fans. Adesanya thought Strickland was going to be relatively easy, as did all the fans. It's hard to know who are the other fighters that can pull off these kind of upsets. That's why they're called upsets. We just don't know. It's like believing that Arnold Allen or Kelvin Kattar won't have a shot at beating Alexander Volkanovski, and then they just pull it off. But looking at dark horses of each division, I would say of the heavyweight division, it's probably Alexander Volkov. I think people are very much overlooking him. For light heavyweight, I would say it's Johnny Walker or Nikita Krylov. For middleweight, I would say it's Roman Dolidze. For welterweight, do you count Bilal Muhammad? He's top 3, but people still overlook him. But I would probably pick Sean Brady or Jeff Neal. For the lightweight division, I think Grant Dawson is very much overlooked. So I would say Grant Dawson's a dark horse of lightweight. For featherweight, I would say Movsar Evloev. Even though he had not a great performance in this last fight, the guy is still performing overall very well in the UFC, and he's very much overlooked. For the bantamweight division, I don't know if I can count Umar because there are a lot of people very high on him. But yeah, I'll pick Umar. For the flyweight division, Matthias Nicolau. The guy's still very good even though he's coming off a pretty bad loss. He's been improving so much in his career. For the women's bantamweight division, I mean, is there a dark horse? Norma Dumont, I guess. For women's flyweight, I think Vivian Araújo is very much overlooked. And for women's strawweight, I would say Tabitha Ritchie. Then go to the next question. With Volkov's dominant win, is it possible that he could break through and write off the gatekeeper narrative? And if so, are there any other gatekeepers in any other division that could possibly put it together for a legitimate title run? So I guess this kind of goes somewhat hand in hand with the last question. Yeah, Volkov's dominant performance, I kind of expected it, but you never know with the heavyweight division, so anything could happen. But technically speaking, Taito Ivasa is not even close to Volkov. And Volkov is usually very focused on his defense, but in that Derek Lewis fight, I think it threw a narrative onto him that probably wasn't fair. I think the loss of Derek Lewis is just sometimes you get caught because he was winning that whole fight and then gets clipped in the third round by a Hail Mary overhand, and his defense against that punch during that moment was not that great, and he would probably admit that too. I don't think that happens again if he fought Lewis. And I do think that Volkov right now is the gatekeeper of heavyweight, but he has a legitimate title run in him. The guy is so good on the feet. Everybody's going to have a hard time with this guy that can't wrestle fairly well. I think like Curtis Blades can do some stuff to him. If Almeida can get him to the ground, then Volkov is out of his element. And there is Tom Aspinall, of course. Losing to Tom Aspinall is not looking as bad as it did before, knowing that Aspinall is one of the best heavyweights in the world. But Volkov did get ran through fairly easily. So if he's not running into guys like that, John Jones, Curtis Blades, maybe Almeida, and Tom Aspinall, of course, the guy could make his way to a title fight. That is a lot of guys to dodge or not fight. But I think John Jones is going to retire very soon. And if Cyril Gane gets the belt or Sergey Pavlovich, Volkov's chances of winning the belt is pretty good. I'm not going to say he's the favorite, but it's definitely possible. Any other gatekeepers with a real title run in them? So who would you say is the gatekeeper at light heavyweight? Is it Anthony Smith? Does Anthony Smith have a legitimate title run? No, I don't think so. The middleweight division, it was Derek Brunson, but now I would probably say it's either Jack Hermanson. I don't think he has a run at the title. For the welterweight division, the gatekeeper, sadly, it's Wonderboy. He used to be a title challenger in his prime. He's not far off from his prime, but he is older and his takedown defense has declined, whereas striking is still looking as good as ever. Does he have a legitimate title run? Yes. It's a fairly slim one, but if he gets that fight with Kamaru Usman and beats him, he gets a title shot, man. And who would have wanted to see Leon Edwards versus Wonderboy? Now, if Colby beats Leon, that's not a good fight for Wonderboy at all. But yes, he has a legitimate title run in him. For the lightweight division, the gatekeeper is either Dan Hooker or RDA. And you know how crazy that is to say because both those two on the lower ends of the rankings, right? Dan Hooker is number 9, RDA is number 11. It just tells you that everybody above them has a shot at a title. They're all past a gatekeeper. That's how stacked the lightweight division is. And do I think Dan Hooker or RDA has a title run in them? No, I don't think so. For the featherweight division, I think the gatekeeper is either Josh Emmett or Kelvin Kattar. There is something to say about Kelvin Kattar. Josh Emmett's too old, right? He had his chance. I think we saw the best of him. And there's probably going to be a decline from here on out until a soon retirement because there's no way he keeps it up for much longer. He's taken so much damage in his career. He's much older. He's pretty old for the fight game. For the bantamweight division, the gatekeeper is Rob Font. Rob Font is taking out the young talents like Adrian Yanez, and he's getting beat by the top contenders like Corey Sandhagen. So I would say Rob Font is the gatekeeper. Does he have a title run in him? No, I don't think so. I think a major reason for that is it's not his skills because he's a very good boxer, but he's just too old to make those adjustments at this point. He had a good shot against Corey. If he beat Corey, then he absolutely has a shot at the title. But the way he lost to Corey was not promising, man. Does not give me confidence in him. For the flyweight division, I would say the gatekeeper is probably Alex Perez or Matthias Nicolau, maybe. Do either of these two have a shot at the title? I don't think Alex Perez does, but Nicolau can put some things together. The guy had a pretty good streak not too long ago. For the women's bantamweight division, I mean, everybody pretty much has a shot in this weight class. The gatekeeper is probably Holly Holm at this point, but with Amanda Nunes out, maybe she's not a gatekeeper anymore. But does Holly Holm have a shot at the title? Yeah, I definitely say so. Or you could say Irene Aldana may be a gatekeeper. There's a lot of fighters in this weight class that could be looked at as a gatekeeper. For the women's flyweight division, the gatekeeper, in my opinion, is Jennifer Maia or Lauren Murphy. I don't see either of these two getting a title shot. For the women's strawweight division, I would say Marina Rodriguez is the gatekeeper, or maybe Tisha Torres, one of these two. And Marina Rodriguez is pretty good on the feet, but I just don't see her getting a title shot. Maybe in the future, I wouldn't rule it out, but it's hard to see anytime soon. Then we got the Star Platinum Schmidt. Who among the fighters in the UFC or other top promotions do you think could be categorized as a C-tier athlete, but A-tier or S-tier technician? So not a good athlete, but he is very technical. So I'll go through each division. I would say Alexander Volkov is a good example of that. He's a big, tall guy, don't get me wrong, but he doesn't look athletic. He looks kind of gumpy, even with the way he moves and stuff, but he's such a technician for that weight class. For the light heavyweight division, I think Jan Blachowicz actually is a perfect example, just across the board, of a guy who's a C-tier athlete. He's very flat-footed, but he's a pretty good technician out there, man, especially shown in that Adesanya fight. For the middleweight division, I would say Sean Strickland is a very good example of this. I wouldn't say he's like a bad athlete. He looks like just like an average athletic guy, but he's like an A-tier, S-tier technician for sure. For the welterweight division, there's not a lot of good examples. It looks like everybody in the top 15 is fairly athletic. Leon, Usman, Colby, even Bilal. Bilal's not a bad athlete. Hamzat, Burns, Shavkat, Wonderboy. For the lightweight division, it's easily Beneil Dariush. Beneil Dariush stands out. He is not a good athlete, but he is technical. For the featherweight division, everybody's athletic. Mavsar may be the least athletic, but he still looks kind of athletic. Yeah, I don't know anybody at featherweight. They're all athletic, every single one of them. I mean, look at Volk, look at Max, Yair, Ortega, Allen, Topuria, Emmett, Cater, Shikadze, Bryce Mitchell, Sadiq Youssef, Dan Ige, Edson Barboza, Bruce Leroy, Lerone Murphy. These guys are all pretty athletic. For the bantamweight division, it's easily Pedro Munoz. For the flyweight division, I don't know anybody that's not an athlete at this low of a weight class. Everybody has to be athletic at this point. Maybe Matt Schnell or Tim Elliott. One of them two maybe, but once you get to like lightweight and down, nearly everybody's athletic. They could just do things with their bodies that most other people can't do. I mean, you're seeing lightweights doing backflips off the cage and stuff. It's crazy. And it's pretty crazy too. Every single champion is athletic. I would say the least athletic is Sean Strickland, as crazy as that is. John Jones is very athletic. Jamal Hill is athletic. Leon Edwards, super athletic. Islam's athletic. Volk, I mean, do we have to say any more? Volk used to play professional rugby, which you have to be super athletic to play. I mean, what do you say about Sean O'Malley? This guy's super athletic too. Zhang Wei Li's very athletic. Alexa Grasso's pretty athletic. Then we get to Dre Johnson. If Dana decided to put you in charge of matchmaking for UFC 300, what would be your main card? I know it's a little far in the future, but I feel like it's close enough to have a pretty good idea of good matchups. For UFC 300, when would that be actually? So that's looking like April. There's a lot of options here. You have to have 3 title fights, and you have to have Jim Miller on there. So right off the bat, I would say Jim Miller versus Tony Ferguson. Both lightweight legends, and hopefully both retire after. I would like to say Conor McGregor, but he's probably going to fight before UFC 300. O'Malley's probably going to fight again before that, so I don't even know if he's going to be champ at the time. Yeah, it is far away to really know, because there's a lot of champions that might fight before this happens, and they could lose their belts. So I don't even know who would be champion by that time. But just for fun, let's say no fighter fights until then. We have all the fights booked right now, and then we have a big hiatus until UFC 300. So it would be awesome to see Conor McGregor versus Michael Chandler to main event. You have Alex Pereira versus Yuri Prohaska. And then you have Sean O'Malley versus Chito Vera. That would be the 3 main fights. I would also throw in Hamza Chimaev versus Israel Adesanya. Given if Hamza beats Paulo Costa, Shavkat Rakhmonov versus Gilbert Burns, Sergey Pavlovich versus Tom Aspinall, and Dustin Poirier versus Rafael Fiziev. I know that's a lot of fights, but that's what I would love to see. There's so many matchups you can make on this one. Then another one from Dre Johnson. People really like your questions. If you could somehow take DNA and clone a fighter from the past and have them be able to start training now, learn the new advancements of MMA, who would it be? My choice would be Yoel Romero or Chuck Liddell. You're my favorite MMA channel. Thank you so much, man. Oh, Yoel Romero would be amazing. But it's just if he would implement some of this stuff. A past fighter to learn new techniques. Chuck Liddell would be a good one. I think Fedor would be amazing. Imagine Fedor with the new stuff. I low-key think a prime Tito Ortiz, if you taught him the new techniques of MMA, would be a monster today. Or Randy Couture too. Randy Couture would be insane in that light heavyweight division. Same with Brock Lesnar. I mean, Brock was on some stuff, but like, could you imagine if he knew more MMA? Like, he knew all the new stuff? With his athleticism and how big and strong that guy is, he'd be unstoppable. I think you had the best choice, though. I think Yoel Romero would be the pick. I mean, could you imagine a young Yoel Romero at 22 years old learning MMA? Who would beat this guy? Imagine he learned imagine he got disciplined and fought by game plans and knew what he was doing out there. Good techniques, all the new stuff to him too. I don't think there would be a middleweight in the world that would beat this guy. I still sometimes think about if Yoel Romero actually went into MMA in the middleweight division during Anderson Silva's reign. What would have happened? Look at the Troy Hartung. If Khabib's father didn't pass away, how much longer do you think he would have continued to compete in the UFC? And who do you think some of his next opponents would have been after Justin Gaethje? Which of them would have been the toughest for him? He would fight Charles Oliveira very, very soon after that. I see him beating Charles. Let me just say this out here. I don't see any lightweight in the world beating Khabib ever. As much as I like some of these other lightweights, if we're going to be completely honest, Khabib seemed unstoppable. So I think he would beat Charles. He would beat Chandler. He would take on maybe Fiziev or Dariush. Easily beat them two. Fiziev would be tough in the first round or so, but then gasses out very, very quickly and Khabib smashes him. And honestly speaking, Khabib could continue as long as he wanted, up until he gets too old. Or if he just wants to give Islam a shot at becoming champ and he moves up to 170. You have Chandler and Fiziev. These guys would be difficult for like the first 2 rounds, but I see him smashing both of them right after that, right? They're both going to gas out, trying to knock him out, trying to stuff all the takedowns. They can't keep up the pace. They start drowning and Khabib smashes them both. So given Khabib's age, he was like, 33 years old when he retired. I would give him 4 years of dominance if he wanted to, and I don't think any of these guys would have beaten him. I think he will get tested though more than ever before. I think like maybe Oliveira can give him some issues. I think Chandler can give him some issues. I think Fiziev can give him some early issues. Maybe Saryukian if he fights him down the road. But the thing about it is, 2 of the top contenders he has already beaten, and one of them he would never fight, right? He would never fight Islam, and he already beat Gaethje and Poirier, 2 of like the top 5 fighters in that weight class right now. And those 2 guys did not really get too close to beating him. So who do I think is the toughest challenge for Khabib? So I would say Chandler has skills and athleticism to be the hardest fight for Khabib, but knowing how he fights, he's going to get smashed late in that fight and most likely get finished. I think Fiziev can give him a lot of trouble in the first round. I think Oliveira overall throughout the fight is always game, always there to find a finish. The thing about Arman Saryukian though is Arman's going to get a lot better. He has high level wrestling. He's very athletic. He is powerful and he doesn't have to worry as much of getting clipped. So I think he can give Khabib the most back and forth kind of fight, even though Khabib probably wins every round, compared to Chandler or Fiziev winning the first round against him and then getting destroyed later. But then again, Arman doesn't have the best cardio. I think overall, maybe Charles Oliveira is the toughest fight for Khabib. It's tough to really say. None of these guys beat him though. If we go to threats, how would you rank Benson Smooth Henderson's career compared to each other UFC lightweight champion? So I believe Benson Henderson is one of the most underrated fighters of all time. He holds the record for most lightweight title defenses, tied with Khabib and BJ Penn. But given the competition, so Khabib is obviously higher than Benson Henderson in terms of greatness. I would say out of all the undisputed champions, Khabib is number 1, Charles Oliveira is number 2, and I say Benson Henderson's number 3. The reason why I don't rank BJ Penn as high as Benson is because for the lightweight division only, not looking at welterweight, just for the lightweight division, Benson's competition was much harder than BJ Penn's, right? BJ Penn won the belt against Joe Stevenson and defended against Kenny Florian. Diego Sanchez was good, and he beat Sean Shirk. Sean Shirk was pretty good, I guess, but look at the guys that Benson fought. Benson beat Frankie Edgar twice. He beat Nate Diaz, Gilbert Melendez, when so many people believed that Gilbert was one of the better lightweights of the world. This guy was a long-time Strikeforce lightweight champion, right? Before Benson Henderson, he was on the best win streak of his entire career. Gilbert was on a 7-fight win streak, and all of those fights before Benson Henderson were title wins. He beat Rodrigo Dam, Mitsuo Yoshida, Josh Thompson twice, Shinya Aoki, Tatsuya Kawajiri, and Jorge Masvidal. He beat all these guys in a row before fighting Benson Henderson and lost to him. Benson also beat Jim Miller. He beat Josh Thompson. He beat Donald Cerrone twice. He was the WEC champion against beating Jamie Varner. Benson Henderson has a lot of great wins in his career, and when you talk about his skills and everything he used to do in the octagon, he revolutionized some techniques, made them popular for a lot of people to use as well. This is not a thing yet, but I still remember when he used to punch Nate Diaz in the leg, and actually backed him up doing that too. It was hilarious, but it was effective. So I think Benson Henderson is so overlooked. And the thing is, even when he used to fight, nobody really appreciated him that much. A lot of people did not appreciate him. I mean, people thought he was boring. He was winning some split decisions and stuff like that, but he was going up against top-notch fighters, man. He was fighting some of the best lightweights in the world. And also, the Anthony Pettis losses put a shadow over his career because he lost to him twice. He got Showtime kicked in the face from the first fight and then got submitted in the first round of the second fight. And that's ultimately the end of the episode, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed it. And if you did, make sure to give the video a like, make sure to subscribe, hit the bell for notifications, and I'll see you guys in the next video.